Have you heard of the prophecy of Saint Malachy? A set of enigmatic words supposedly written by an Irish bishop in the 12th century, describing all the popes of the Catholic Church until the end of times. At the end of this mysterious list, one name stands out: Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman, identified as the last pope, the one who would lead the Church during a time of tribulation, culminating in its destruction or the arrival of the final judgment. But is this prophecy true? And if it is, how does it connect with current events in the Vatican, the challenges faced by the Church, and the transformations of the modern world? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your support. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube share these videos with more people and allowing me to continue bringing you this content. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. The story of the prophecy of Saint Malachy begins in the 12th century, when the Irish bishop Mael Madach Ue Morgair, better known as Saint Malachy, reportedly received a heavenly vision during a journey to Rome. In the vision, he saw all the popes who would occupy St. Peter's throne until the end of time. This mysterious episode resulted in a list of 112 short phrases, each supposedly describing a pope. The question is, was this list a divine revelation or a product of medieval imagination? Between divine vision and medieval imagination, I'd bet the Middle Ages creativity was on turbo mode. But let's see where this leads. The document remained unknown for centuries until it was discovered in 1590 and published by the Benedictine monk Arnold Wyon in his book Lignum Vitae. Curiously, it surfaced during a time of intense disputes within the Church, when papal elections were highly political and involved significant European interests. This raises suspicions about its origin. Was it created to legitimize or influence the selection of a new pope? Many of the early popes described in the list align remarkably with events in their lives or symbols associated with them. For example, the motto Ex Castro Tiberis, from the castle of the Tiber, seems to refer to Pope Celestine II, who was born near the Tiber River. These coincidences convinced many that the prophecy had something supernatural about it. However, critics point out that the descriptions become vaguer and more subjective as the list progresses, especially after the period when the text was discovered. This supports the theory that the early mottos may have been written based on historical information, while the later ones were speculative or generic. One intriguing aspect is the style of the phrases, blending Latin and enigmatic symbolism. Combined with the mystical context of the Middle Ages, the prophecy fascinated both religious and scholarly audiences. It's essential to remember that during that time, prophecies were considered legitimate tools for understanding the future, which may explain their initial acceptance. On the other hand, theorists suggest that the list was fabricated with a political purpose. In the 16th century, the Church faced crises such as the Protestant Reformation and internal power struggles. A prophecy that legitimized a specific pope would have been a powerful tool to consolidate authority. This would explain why the text was published at that moment, centuries after Saint Malachy's death. Even so, some defend the prophecy's authenticity, pointing to striking coincidences between the descriptions and modern popes. For instance, the motto associated with John Paul II, De Labor Solis, from the work of the sun, is often interpreted as a reference to the fact that he was born during a solar eclipse and his funeral coincided with another eclipse. Coincidence or destiny? Other interpretations argue that the list is so ambiguous that anyone can find connections based on loose interpretations. It's the same logic that makes horoscopes seem accurate. The phrases are vague enough to fit different contexts. This undermines the credibility of the text as a genuine map of the future. Despite the doubts, the prophecy continues to draw interest, especially due to its apocalyptic tone. The mention of a final pope resonates with biblical prophecies of Revelation, creating a bridge between the medieval document and broader religious beliefs. This aspect keeps it relevant in contemporary debates. A central discussion point is the number of popes described, 112. Since Pope Francis assumed St. Peter's throne, theorists have wondered, could he be the last pope? The count seems to align, but there are debates about possible omissions or popes not officially considered in the succession line. Additionally, the final motto, Petrus Romanus, deviates from the format of the others. It's more extensive and suggests a period of great tribulation for the Church, culminating in its downfall. This change in style raises suspicions. Was it a later addition or the planned culmination of a true prophecy? Another critical detail is the context of Saint Malachy. He was known for his spiritual visions and devotion to the church. His contemporaries reported that he had prophetic gifts, including predicting the date of his own death. This strengthens the idea that he could have received a divine vision. Regardless, the prophecy of Saint Malachy remains one of the most intriguing documents in religious history. It blends mysticism, politics, and spirituality into a narrative that transcends centuries. Its authenticity may be questioned, but its impact on the collective imagination is undeniable. Are we interpreting this list correctly? Or is there something deeper behind these enigmatic words that we have yet to understand? The name Petrus Romanus carries symbolic weight that spans centuries. Translated as Peter the Roman, it is described in Saint Malachy's prophecy as the last leader of the Catholic Church, who will face times of tribulation before the final destruction or a radical transformation. But who, in fact, is this enigmatic figure? Could it be a literal pope or just an archetype created to symbolize the Church's return to its origins? From the start, the name Peter creates a direct connection to Saint Peter, the first pope and one of Christianity's most important figures. For this reason, many believe Petrus Romanus represents the closing of a cycle, as if the last pope's role is to restore the church to its early roots. Calling the last pope Peter is a bold move. It's like ending an epic movie by going back to the beginning. Dramatic and symbolic, right? However, it's unlikely that any modern pope would choose the name Peter, out of reverence for Saint Peter. So could this be merely a symbolic title? The prophecy also mentions that this last pope will face great tribulations. Many interpret this as a period of persecution for the church, whether by external forces like governments or global crises, or internal issues like divisions among the faithful and leaders. In a world where organized religions face increasing skepticism, could this prediction reflect the current scenario? Other scholars argue that the name Petrus Romanus shouldn't be interpreted literally. Instead, it might represent a pope who brings back Christianity's original values, leading a return to simplicity and purity. In this sense, some draw parallels with Pope Francis, known for his humble demeanor and calls for reform. But does he fit the role of a Peter the Roman? An interesting analysis is the connection to Rome. While all popes have a direct link to the city, the prophecy seems to emphasize this uniquely in the case of Petrus Romanus. This suggests that this last pope will play an even more significant role in defending the Vatican, especially in times of global crisis. Could this emphasis indicate a direct threat to the very heart of the Church? For defenders of the prophecy's authenticity, Petrus Romanus is not just the last pope, but also a symbol of the end of an era. Just as Saint Peter was the first to guide Christians, the last would bear the responsibility of leading the Church in its final phase. This vision reinforces the idea of a spiritual cycle culminating in a return to the starting point. On the other hand, critics argue that the prophecy is too vague to be taken seriously. They suggest that the name Petrus Romanus could be attributed to any pope, depending on interpretation. Moreover, the fact that the final motto is longer and more specific than the others raises suspicions of manipulation. Was this passage added later to create an air of mystery? The connection between Petrus Romanus and the biblical apocalypse is also widely debated. Many see parallels between this figure and the events described in the book of John, such as the rise of the Antichrist and the final judgment. Others suggest that he symbolizes the last stand of good against the forces of evil. But does Saint Malachy's prophecy truly align with these apocalyptic visions? Interestingly, the final motto mentions that during Petrus Romanus's reign, the city of seven hills, a reference to Rome, will be destroyed. This has sparked speculation about possible scenarios. Could it be a literal destruction, such as a natural catastrophe or an attack? Or might it symbolize the end of the Vatican's influence in the modern world? In more conspiratorial circles, theories suggest that Petrus Romanus could be a corrupt leader or even controlled by evil forces, such as the Antichrist himself. This view is amplified by growing distrust in religious institutions and authority figures. But do these ideas have any foundation, or are they simply reflections of modern fears? Another intriguing point is the idea that Petrus Romanus might already be among us, either as the current pope or an imminent successor. With Pope Francis seen as a reformist and charismatic leader, many prophecy theorists question whether he is the last on the list. But if so, how could he fit the role of Peter the Roman? Christian tradition also suggests that, in times of crisis, a spiritual leader emerges to guide the faithful. This raises the possibility that Petrus Romanus is not necessarily the last pope, but rather the last true spiritual leader before a drastic change in the Church. Could this be the hidden message of the prophecy? Regardless of interpretation, the figure of Petrus Romanus remains shrouded in mystery. He is described as a figure of resistance who will face difficult times with courage and faith. But at the same time, he is also associated with the end of an era, leaving open the question, what comes next? In the end, perhaps the prophecy's purpose is less about predicting the future and more about making us reflect on the present. Are we living in times of tribulation? And if so, what can we learn from the challenges faced by the Church and the world today? In recent years, the Catholic Church has faced a series of crises that have deeply shaken its credibility and unity. Financial scandals, abuse allegations, and internal divisions raise a troubling question. Could we be witnessing the signs of tribulation predicted in St. Malachi's prophecy? One of the most visible issues is the financial crisis gripping the Vatican. Leaked documents have revealed irregularities in fund management, including questionable investments and allegations of mismanagement. In a time when transparency is demanded, the Holy See's image as a moral guardian has been tarnished by these controversies. Could this be a reflection of the decay preceding the reign of Petrus Romanus? Another devastating blow to the Church was the wave of sexual abuse scandals within the clergy. Accusations emerged from various parts of the world, revealing a network of silence and complicity that persisted for decades. These allegations not only drove many faithful away, but also cast a shadow over the Church's authority itself. Are these revelations connected to the great tribulations described in the prophecy? Meanwhile, within the Vatican's walls, there is a constant struggle between the progressive and conservative factions of the Church. A clash between progressives and conservatives? It's like politics has fully entered the Church. Can this be resolved without further fractures? Pope Francis, with his reformist stance, has faced strong opposition from cardinals and bishops who see his changes as a threat to secular traditions. This division is seen by many as a sign that the Church is more vulnerable than ever. Modern challenges are not limited to internal scandals. The Catholic Church also faces growing secularization in society. In various parts of the world, the number of faithful is declining, and churches are increasingly empty. Young people, in particular, are turning away from organized religion, seeking spirituality outside traditional institutions. Could this distancing be interpreted as a sign of the Church's weakening before its prophesied fall? Additionally, the rise of political polarization has affected the Church. Catholic leaders are pressured to take positions on heated debates about human rights, social justice, and climate change. While some support Pope Francis's progressive messages, others reject them as a departure from fundamental doctrines. This tension reinforces the sense that the Church is at a crossroads. We cannot ignore the conspiracy theories surrounding the Vatican. Some suggest that external forces, such as governments or secret organizations, are manipulating events to weaken the Church. Others believe there is an internal conspiracy, with members of the clergy sabotaging Francis's reforms. How close to reality are these theories? Among the most traditionalist Catholics, there is a fear that the current pontificate is leading the Church toward irreparable rupture. Some accuse the Pope of compromising fundamental principles in the name of modernization, while others see him as a leader destined to prepare the Church for an uncertain future. Could these divisions lead to the collapse predicted in the prophecy? Despite all the turmoil, the Vatican remains one of the world's most influential institutions. However, its relevance is increasingly challenged by global movements promoting a more secular worldview. Is this loss of influence merely a natural consequence of modernity, or a sign of something greater? Looking ahead, some analysts suggest that the Church must undergo profound transformation to survive. Structural reforms, transparency, and a more open dialogue with its faithful are often cited as necessary paths. But would this transformation align with the idea that the Church will face destruction? A troubling question looms over all this. Will the prophesied end of the Church be literal or symbolic? Could the fall represent the physical destruction of the Vatican or a spiritual transformation, so radical that the institution, as we know it, will cease to exist. Another critical point is the impact of modern technology. Social media and digital platforms have exposed the Church's flaws more quickly and comprehensively than ever before. This constant scrutiny is accelerating a crisis of trust that, for many, seems irreversible. Can the Vatican withstand this level of pressure? History teaches us that powerful institutions can fall suddenly and unexpectedly. Could St. Malachi's prophecy be warning us of a repetition of this pattern? Or will the Church find a way to overcome these tribulations and emerge stronger than ever? Regardless of the answer, one thing is certain: the Vatican is at a decisive moment. The course of its history in the coming years may determine whether it becomes the stage for the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy or the beginning of a new era of spiritual renewal. Could the prophecy merely reflect common human crises inherent to any organization, or is there truly something greater at play? The prophecy of St. Malachi is often associated with the biblical book of Revelation, one of the most enigmatic texts of Christian scripture. Written by the Apostle John on the island of Patmos, Revelation describes a series of catastrophic events that precede the final judgment. But how closely are these two prophecies connected? Revelation presents symbols that many associate with the end of times: the rise of the Antichrist, the Great Tribulation, and the return of Christ to judge the living and the dead. For scholars of St. Malachi's prophecy, the last pope, Petrus Romanus, could be directly tied to these events. But would he be a force for good, guiding the faithful, or an ambiguous figure associated with corruption and decline? One of the most intriguing parallels is the figure of the Antichrist, described in Revelation as a leader who will deceive nations before the final battle. Just hearing the word Antichrist sends shivers down your spine. It sounds like a movie villain, but some people take it very seriously. Some theorists suggest that the last pope could be manipulated or corrupted by evil forces, becoming an agent of chaos rather than a defender of the faith. This raises the question: how do we distinguish a true spiritual leader from an impostor? However, the opposite interpretation also exists. Petrus Romanus could be the ultimate defender of the Christian faith, battling against the forces of evil in a world turning away from God. Just as St. Peter was the foundation of the early church, the last pope would be the rock sustaining the institution during its greatest crisis. But would he endure until the end? Revelation also speaks of the destruction of the great city that sits on 7 hills, a reference widely interpreted as Rome. This description is unsettling when combined with the final motto of St. Malachi's prophecy, which mentions the Church's destruction under Petrus Romanus's reign. Is this a coincidence or a deliberate connection between the two texts? Another link lies in the signs of tribulation mentioned in the Bible, such as wars, famine, and natural disasters. Many interpret the challenges faced by the Catholic Church, scandals, divisions, and loss of followers, as reflections of these signs. But are these events evidence of a prophetic fulfillment or merely inevitable crises for a millennia-old institution? For theologians, Revelation is not just a text of destruction, but also one of renewal. After the catastrophic events, it describes the creation of new heavens and a new earth, symbolizing spiritual rebirth. This suggests that even if the Church faced collapse, there could be a transformation leading to a new era. Could this be the true meaning of the end, described by St. Malachi? The figure of Babylon, representing corruption and spiritual decadence, is also relevant. Some critics argue that the modern Church reflects elements of this description due to scandals and internal disputes. Others, however, believe this interpretation is an unfair attack on the institution. After all, how do we separate human flaws from divine essence? The symbolism of Revelation is rich and ambiguous, allowing for multiple interpretations. For instance, the beasts described could represent secular forces challenging the Church's authority. This aligns with the growing secularization of the modern world, where traditional religions are losing ground to more secular perspectives. Could this be part of the tribulation mentioned by Malachi? Another significant point is the final battle between good and evil, described in Revelation as Armageddon. Some theorists believe this battle will not be literal but spiritual, involving ideologies and beliefs. In this context, Petrus Romanus could be the leader who faces this conflict on behalf of the Church. But would he prevail? Critics of the connections between Malachi and Revelation argue that these associations are forced. They see the prophecy as a reflection of common human anxieties, amplified by contemporary crises. Yet for believers, these similarities are evidence that we are approaching a pivotal moment in human history. It's also essential to consider the role of the faithful. In Revelation, the righteous are called to persevere amidst difficulties. Similarly, St. Malachi's prophecy could be a warning for Catholics to strengthen their faith in the face of tribulations. But is that enough to prevent the fulfillment of a prophetic destiny? The relationship between St. Malachi's prophecy and Revelation reflects a recurring theme in history: the fear of the unknown. Since ancient times, humans have sought to predict the future, finding meaning in chaotic events. Is the prophecy an attempt to impose order on chaos, or a genuine glimpse of what's to come? The connection between the two texts can be interpreted in various ways. For some, it is proof that the Church is in danger. For others, it is an invitation to spiritual reflection. But the question remains: are we truly living in the times described in Revelation and Malachi's prophecy, or are these crises simply part of history's natural course? Since Pope Francis assumed St. Peter's throne in 2013, he has been a polarizing leader, both within and beyond the Catholic Church. Known for his humble style and reformist stance, he has sparked hope among many faithful, but also provoked ire from more conservative factions. This makes him a central figure in the discussion of St. Malachi's prophecy. Could he be the last pope, described as Petrus Romanus? Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was the first Latin American pope and the first Jesuit to lead the Catholic Church. First Latin American, first Jesuit. The guy made history from day one. But could this be the last chapter? From the start, he broke traditions. He rejected papal luxuries, opted for a simple lifestyle, and focused on social issues like poverty and climate change. This approach won millions over, but also fueled tensions within the Church. Could these tensions be the prelude to a deeper division? One of Francis's most defining traits is his willingness to reform old structures. He has taken steps to combat financial corruption in the Vatican, reorganized the Roman Curia, and promoted greater transparency. However, these actions have faced fierce resistance from conservative groups who view his reforms as a threat to institutional stability. Is he dismantling the pillars that have supported the Church for centuries? Among the most frequent criticisms is his approach to controversial issues, such as LGBTQIA+ rights, women's roles in the Church, and communion for divorced individuals. By opening space for discussions once considered taboo, Francis has attracted both applause and accusations of diluting traditional teachings. Is he a visionary leader or a sign that the Church is on the verge of irreparable rupture? An intriguing theory is that Francis represents the beginning of the end. Some prophecy theorists believe his choice of name, Francis, reflects a connection to Saint Francis of Assisi, known for prophecies about a leader emerging in times of great tribulation. This link is reinforced by the view of Francis as a pastor for difficult times. But is he guiding the Church toward renewal or collapse? The relationship between Francis and the Roman Curia is another point of tension. He has frequently criticized the Vatican bureaucracy, calling it rigid and disconnected from the faithful. This stance has created enemies among more traditional leaders, who accuse him of being authoritarian and divisive. Could these internal disputes lead to the symbolic destruction mentioned in the prophecy? Beyond internal issues, Francis has faced global challenges. He has taken a stance on crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and rising social inequalities. His leadership during chaotic times is admired, but it also raises questions. Are these crises part of the prophetic context of final tribulations? Another often raised critique is his closeness to progressive causes. Some traditionalist groups accuse Francis of abandoning spirituality in favor of a political agenda. However, his supporters argue that he is merely updating the Church to address the challenges of the 21st century. Can this delicate balance between tradition and modernity be sustained for long? Francis's popularity outside the Church is also significant. He is widely respected by world leaders and people of other faiths, giving him unique influence. But this universal acceptance could be seen as a point of vulnerability, especially by those who view the last pope as someone who will face fierce opposition. Could he be undergoing trials before a great tribulation? For many, Pope Francis is a symbol of hope and renewal. But for others, he is a warning sign, indicating that the Church is straying from its roots. This duality reflects the complexity of his leadership and the difficulty of interpreting his role in light of Saint Malachy's prophecy. We also cannot ignore rumors about his health. At 87 years old, Francis faces physical challenges that have already led him to reduce his schedule. This has sparked speculation about his potential resignation or even who might succeed him. If he truly is the last pope, what would happen after his papacy? Additionally, his emphasis on environmental issues, such as the climate crisis, has brought new focus to the Church's doctrine. For some, this approach is visionary. For others, it's a distraction from spiritual teachings. Is this shift in priorities a necessary adaptation, or a sign that the Church is losing its central purpose? Francis has also called for unity, urging dialogue between different factions within the Church. However, this unity seems increasingly difficult to achieve. Internal divisions continue to grow, and the question remains, can he keep the Church united amid such opposition? Whether as a reformer or the last guardian of faith, Francis's role is far from simple. He bears the weight of a millennia-old institution in times of unprecedented challenges. His leadership is shaping the Church's future, for better or for worse. At the heart of all this lies the question, is Pope Francis merely another leader in difficult times, or is he the protagonist of a prophecy that could alter the course of Church history? The idea that the last pope will mark the end of an era for the Catholic Church is one of the most unsettling aspects of Saint Malachy's prophecy. But what would truly happen after Petrus Romanus's reign? The prophecy suggests destruction, but it does not specify whether it will be literal or symbolic. Is the Church doomed to physical collapse, or will its spiritual influence fade away? Some scholars believe that the end mentioned in the prophecy does not mean annihilation but transformation. Just as many institutions have evolved over centuries, the Church could be reborn in a completely new way, adapted to modern times. But is it possible to reimagine an institution so deeply rooted in tradition without compromising its essence? For many, the Church's fall would signify the end of a spiritual era. As the world's largest religious institution, its dissolution or weakening would have profound implications for the faith of billions. A world without Vatican leadership could create space for new forms of spirituality, but also leave a moral void. Would we be prepared to face such a shift? There is also the possibility that the end refers only to the collapse of physical and bureaucratic structures. The Church, as a community of faith, could continue to exist in a more decentralized format, with regional leadership replacing the figure of the Pope. Decentralization? Sounds nice in theory, but imagine the chaos in practice. Who decides what's right or wrong? This would reflect a return to the Church's origins, but would it be enough to sustain such a vast institution? Another interpretation suggests that the end of the papacy would result from internal and external crises. The loss of followers, scandals, and the pressure of an increasingly secular world could make centralized leadership unsustainable. In this scenario, the Church might fragment into different branches, each interpreting faith uniquely. Would this be a return to primitive Christianity or a disaster for religious unity? For those who see a connection between the prophecy and the biblical apocalypse, the end of the papacy would be the prelude to the final judgment. This interpretation is based on the idea that the Vatican's destruction would mark the beginning of catastrophic events, such as spiritual wars and the rise of the Antichrist. But is this vision a literal warning or a metaphor for the purification of faith? The relationship between the Church and secular power is also an important factor. For centuries, the Vatican was a significant political force, influencing governments and shaping global events. Today, this influence is challenged by international organizations and an increasingly pluralistic world. Would the loss of political power be one of the first signs of its downfall? The most grim scenarios include the physical destruction of the Vatican, as mentioned in the prophecy. A natural disaster, an attack, or even internal revolt are possibilities raised by theorists. While extreme, history has shown that even the most enduring institutions can succumb to unforeseen events. Could the Vatican fall victim to such a shock? Another possibility is that the Church survives but loses its relevance. As more people seek spirituality outside organized religions, the Church could become a shadow of its former self, with influence limited to small groups of faithful. Would this decline be the end predicted by Saint Malachy? Some believe that the end of the papacy would be followed by a spiritual renaissance. In this scenario, the faithful would turn to a purer form of Christianity, free of corrupt structures, inspired by Jesus' original teachings. Would this be a victory for faith or an admission that institutions have failed their mission? Conspiracy theories add another layer of mystery. Some suggest that external forces, such as secret societies or governments, are actively working to destabilize the Church. Others believe the prophecy is, in fact, a conspiracy created to manipulate the faithful. But who would benefit from the papacy's end? Regardless of interpretation, one thing is certain: the world would change drastically without the Pope's centralized leadership. The Catholic Church, with its long history and tradition, is one of the pillars of Western civilization. Its fall or transformation would have impacts far beyond religion. Are we ready for such a change? The signs that something is coming are everywhere. Growing secularization, internal scandals, and global challenges point to a moment of crisis. But crises have always been part of the Church's history. What makes this one different? Are we truly witnessing the fulfillment of a prophecy, or just living another chapter in its evolution? Whatever the Church's fate, St. Malachi's prophecy leaves us with a troubling question. What does the end mean? Is it literal destruction, spiritual transformation, or something we cannot yet comprehend? St. Malachi's prophecy continues to intrigue us, whether because of its accuracy at certain points in history or the mystery surrounding its ultimate meaning. It prompts reflection on the Catholic Church's role in a changing world and how crises can signal both decay and opportunities for renewal. Above all, it leaves us with uncertainty. Are we truly facing the last pope? This story is just one piece, and one day, perhaps you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.